So why am I even bothering to do this video after the Verge pulled their terrible PC building tutorial? Well, there are reaction videos, and then there are reaction videos. This is the latter. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and I figured I'd celebrate my brand new studio the only way I know how. If you haven't guessed from the intro of this video, I'm going to be addressing the Verge PC tutorial that went live last week, and if you haven't seen it already, sorry they pulled the video, although there have been a couple reposts of that video up on YouTube. I'm sure you can probably find it. And rather than doing just a reaction video for comedy's sake, which, by the way, some of those were freaking hilarious, I'm going to be doing more my own reaction and reactionary build, as it were. To start things off, I'm going to be building in the exact same case that the Verge did, and that's the Corsair Crystal 280X. And the reason I'm building in the exact same case is to point out how egregious that build actually was. I'm using very similar components in the exact same layout that he did, and I really wanted to show why what he did was so wrong, rather than just pointing and laughing saying, wow, that cable management was terrible, and wow, he really shouldn't have installed that cooler that way, and wow, that's a horrible amount of thermal paste. I'm going to show you the exact right way he should have done it. I'm going to go ahead and give you the part list for this build, but I really don't recommend following this verbatim, as the cooler and the case for this build are way overclassed, and you could easily save quite a bit of money by not going with such a high-end hardware. But I wanted to use the liquid cooler, and obviously I wanted to use the exact same case. But I've got a Gigabyte B360 Micro ATX motherboard, an Intel i3-8100 quad-core processor, a Sapphire RX 580 Pulse 8GB card, 8GB of Patriot DDR4 2800, I believe that is, a Cooler Master CX550 power supply, and the Deepcool Castle 240 AIO. So what tools did I use to put all this together? Well, I've already got my table, that's checked off the list. If you exclude the one zip tie that I used in this machine, you could probably throw that away because it really wasn't that vital. And if you don't use zip ties, then you don't need a set of flush cutters either. So I built this entire system with this. Now this is a multi-bit driver, and I did use two of the bits. I used the number 2 Phillips, which is the standard for pretty much every screw in here, and I used the number 1 Phillips, which is needed for the M.2 drive. If you don't have an M.2 drive, literally just a number 2 Phillips screwdriver. That's all you need. So I'm going to walk through my typical order of operations for building a PC, and I'm going to point out some of the things that he did wrong, but I really don't want to harp on it because that's been done already. He actually did get one thing right though, and step 1 is go to PC Part Picker and make sure that the parts you're buying are compatible with each other. Make sure that your radiator will fit in the case, and that you have enough clearance for your graphics card, and that your power supply will fit, and that the RAM is right for your motherboard, and your CPU will fit in the motherboard socket. It really is a great resource to make sure you don't mix up something along the way. Step 2 is get your case out of the box, take all the panels off of it, and start walking through in your head what this build process is actually going to look like. Kind of plan where everything's going to go and how cables are going to run before you start screwing things in, because you're going to save yourself some time later on. And even after doing that, I still got one thing wrong on this build, and that's I put my power supply in first, which is usually a good idea, but in this case, the power supply blocks the rear access to the motherboard. And in that case, I couldn't get the bracket in for the AIO liquid cooler, so I did have to take the power supply back out, but that wasn't really that big a deal. Step 3 is your motherboard. Now, here's something that he got egregiously wrong. He put the motherboard into the case first, and then he put in the power supply, and then he put in the RAM, and then he put in his graphics card, and he hooked up all his headers, and he installed his fans, and then he installed his CPU. CPU is literally the first thing to go in. Number 1, because it is so fragile, and especially the pins underneath that CPU, or the pins on the CPU if you use an AMD processor. But it is so much easier to install when you're on an open table, rather than trying to cram your hands into a computer with components in the way and risk dropping something on those pins. It is way easier to install it just on the table. To install a CPU, gently push down on the lever, pull it to the side, and then pull the entire bracket towards you. Gently set your CPU down into the socket, making sure to align the notches on the socket with the notches in the CPU. Then close the lid on the CPU socket, and then put the lever back into place. The plastic lid that's on top to protect the pins will pop off when you do this. Once your CPU's in there, go ahead and put your memory in, and also install your M.2 drive if you have one while you're at it. Again, the more room the better here. Now, once I've done that, I usually open the instructions for whatever CPU cooler I'm going to use, and I walk through the installation instructions. And I find out, is it going to be easier to install this outside the case or inside the case? Is there a bracket that needs to be fixed onto the motherboard before it's installed, or can everything be put on in there? Walk through that process and find out what's going to be easier in your exact case. If you're using an all-in-one liquid cooler, go ahead and install the radiator into the case now. But be sure to use the proper length screws. The shorter screws are for holding the radiator to the case, while the longer screws are for holding the fans to the radiator. Next step is actually put your motherboard inside the case and go ahead and screw it down. Now, I'm not going to tell you to don't screw it down too light and don't screw it down too hard. Screw it down with just the right amount of tension with no prior knowledge on the subject and you'll be just fine, because those are terrible instructions. Screws should not be hard to screw in to a computer. Everything is pre-threaded, everything should be pretty well within tolerance. So literally just screw it until the screw stops turning and don't over tighten it. It's that simple. Step 5, oh God. Thermal paste. I'm going to start off this with a plea to the PC community at large. Please, please, stop arguing about this. There are many, many methods of doing this wrong. There's also many methods of doing this correctly. Now, I don't care what method you use, if it's the P or the line or the X or the X and 4 dots or the 3 lines, it's fine. Or if you want to spread it around with your finger, I don't care. As long as you don't put too little on there so you're not actually making contact with the die, and as long as you don't put too much where it's oozing over the side like toothpaste, you're fine. It works. It's been tested ad nauseum. There's no reason to bicker about it anymore. Whatever works for you, works. Please, send me all your hate down below. Once your thermal paste has been properly applied, go ahead and get your CPU cooler mounted up by following the instructions that came with it. Just make sure you follow the right set of instructions for your exact CPU type. Now would also be a great time to connect your front I/O. That's your power and reset buttons, along with your power LEDs, front panel USB, and front panel audio connections. Step 7, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and get the power supply screwed into the case and start running and plugging in the various cables. That's going to be a 24-pin for your motherboard, an 8-pin for your CPU, and then go ahead and run and let hang your graphics card, SATA drive, and any of the peripheral power supply connections you may need. Next, install any case fans you'd like to use and get them plugged into either your motherboard or a fan splitter. You can also install any SATA hard drives or SSDs at this time as well. Connect SATA power and data to them and cable manage as needed. Step 9, graphics card. Now, why did I leave the graphics card for last? Well, it's typically one of the larger components that you're going to install, and it covers up a fair bit of the motherboard, so plugging in your other components like your front I/O cables, your USB, and cable management can actually be fairly difficult if that goes in first. Plus, it just kind of completes the whole look when you're done. To install the graphics card, go ahead and remove any rear PCIe slots that you might have in your way. Set the graphics card down very gently into the PCI slot and it should install with really no force. You should hear a nice satisfying click when the finger grabs the end of it. Now, if you do have to force the graphics card in, you're probably doing something wrong. Pull up, make sure you're not binding on anything inside the case. Make sure it goes in nice and easy. Once it's seated securely, you can go ahead and screw that in, plug in any graphics card leads you need, and you're ready to boot. Go ahead and install the operating system of your choice, get your drivers installed, maybe run a couple of tests to make sure everything's good. Now finish up your final cable management and then close your case. Trust me, I've had numerous components where I've had to take them back out, reseat them, go through troubleshooting steps. It's way easier before you start zip tying everything down. But like I said, on this particular system, I used one zip tie in the entire thing and it really wasn't even necessary. And just look at it, that is a beautiful looking system and something I'd be more than proud of to showcase on my desk here. I wanted to take this video as an opportunity not so much to rag on The Verge and go line by line and tell you exactly what they did wrong, which they did a lot wrong. And if you want to see one of those videos, they're already out there. I wanted to showcase what that PC should have looked like when it was done, and that it doesn't take that much effort or planning or forethought to come out with a really good result on the other side, and that you don't need specialty tools, you just need to put things together the right way, and that's your results. So, I hope you learned something here. I know The Verge certainly did this week, but drop me a comment, let me know what you thought of this video. Was it useful to you? I really do appreciate your feedback. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing. Also be sure to check out my live show, Talking Heads, every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Pacific for the latest in beer and tech news. And for the very first time, I get to sign out from my new studio. So, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.